see here. So first of all, I'll start with what is NMOA. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we're the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan interstate association, which means that we are made up of the solid waste programs, the hazardous waste programs, the waste site cleanup programs, and the pollution prevention programs in the 8 Northeast states, which are Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont. We were formally recognized by EPA as a regional interstate association back in 1986. And we have a website where all kinds of information is, not just the solid waste work, but the waste site cleanup and all the other things that we do for the states. So we are an interstate association. Our members are the state programs. So we apply for different grants for funding on priority topics that the states have, and we've been fortunate to get a grant through the USDA Rural Utility Services, their solid waste management grant program, to focus on improving safety and reducing waste at rural transfer stations. And they have a standard disclaimer that we have up here. So for this project, we have to partner with rural areas. So we've been working in Vermont with the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District and also with the state of Vermont, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and then in New Hampshire with the North Country Council and the Department of Environmental Services. And I'll show you a little more about where we've been working in a minute. The project overall includes, we developed some consumer handouts for people and accompanying posters for transfer stations to utilize. That's sort of more focused on the reducing waste part of the project. And then we've had local workshops and developed a project website. So on today's webinar, we're going to focus on raising awareness of safety issues at rural transfer stations for workers and residents. So I'm going to first start with an overview of, the locations that we've been working with to give everybody some context. Then we'll focus on the different safety issues and potential improvements that we could recommend. And then we'll finish up with a summary of sort of the workshops and some before and after surveys we did. And then we'll have opportunity for Q&A. And like I mentioned, I think we'll break for some Q&A in the middle as well. So I'll give you an overview of where we've been working. So the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District is based in Lyndonville, Vermont. So this is Vermont here, and Lyndonville is up here. And so the Northeast Kingdom is sort of this area up here. And in Vermont, they require that towns do solid waste planning and submit plans to the state. And so in response to that, a lot of the towns formed different waste districts. And so the district, the Northeast Kingdom, provides recycling services for the towns. They also deal with household hazardous waste and other services, and they also help the towns prepare the plans and do the submittals to the state. So that's what's going on sort of in Vermont in this northeast part. Now, across the river, this is the Connecticut River, divides the two states. Across the river is the North Country Council, which is based in Littleton, which is over here. And that is a totally different situation in New Hampshire. The North Country Council is more of a regional planning and an economic development organization. They don't do anything real hands-on with solid waste. They don't provide recycling. They don't provide, they don't run events. They do a lot of assistance and coordination with the states, but they don't deal, on the ground with recycling or solid waste. So, and up in this part of the country, most of the rural towns operate their own transfer stations. Not all of them. Some of them don't have transfer stations at all, but most of them operate their own transfer stations, and most of those are co-located with recycling drop-off centers. So most of the transfer stations also deal with recycling. And in the Northeast, virtually all of our disposal facilities are in the private sector, so the towns are not operating their own landfills. In the whole state of Vermont at this point, there's only one landfill, and it is way up almost in Canada. But as you might have noticed, that's also where the Northeast Kingdom is. So the landfill isn't technically in the Northeast Kingdom, but it's relatively nearby. So their transportation costs for disposal for those towns are not that huge in the Northeast Kingdom. Over in New Hampshire, they've got a few more commercial landfills, and there's also one waste-to-energy facility that operates in New Hampshire. So there's a few more options in New Hampshire for waste disposal, but they are all operated by the private sector, and most of them are also owned by the private sector. In the Northeast, also, one thing that might be different from where you might be located is that people are not allowed to burn their trash. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen in the rural areas, but it is illegal in all the Northeast states. So that's technically, not an option. So it leads people to, to operate transfer stations and to have recycling, and generally waste disposal in the Northeast is pretty expensive compared to other parts of the country. And most of our transfer stations do charge fees for bulky wastes. Again, they don't all charge fees for their bulky waste because they'd rather have the waste come in and deal with it rather than left on the side of the road or piling up in people's backyards. But most transfer stations do charge to deal with bulky waste. So some differences between the New Hampshire and Vermont and where we were working. Pay as you throw. Vermont has a universal recycling law, and so since 2015, so about 2 years ago, all Vermont communities needed to implement pay as you throw. So that is where people pay according to the quantity of waste that they have. And some of the New Hampshire communities do have pay as you throw that have been adopted, locally by the community, but many of the towns don't have it. So that's one difference. Recycling, again, is mandated in Vermont. They have a list of required recyclables that are banned from disposal. And again, that's, a lot of Vermont was doing recycling before, but it's been mandated for everybody since 2015. And in New Hampshire, the towns offer recycling, and some of them do require recycling by their residents by local ordinances, but again, not all towns do that. And a third difference that makes that shows up here is that in terms of training. So New Hampshire has a great program that I highly recommend people look into, where they require that transfer station staff have training. And the program there is facilitated by New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. They don't necessarily develop the training and the content of the training. Like we did a workshop a couple months ago for the North Country Council, and that was something that New Hampshire considered a valid training opportunity, and they advertised that to the other transfer stations in the state, and we had a really good turnout for that training. So they do, keep track of the staff and whether they've had the training. It is a program like an official program. In Vermont, technically, I believe, transfer station staff are supposed to be quote unquote trained, but there is no formal program there, and so people end up getting trained on the job by their colleagues, and so there's more opportunity for bad habits to persist. Whereas in New Hampshire, because they do these training events and people gather and they come from different towns, there's a lot of cross-pollination. people get to know, their peers. There's a lot of information that's exchanged just from people sharing their experiences at these trainings. So again, I highly recommend the New Hampshire program. Another difference is that the Northeast Kingdom provides centralized services for recycling and other things as well. So the towns collect at their recycling centers their self-sorted recyclables, generally in gaylords. They've also got these big plastic bags that they get from a local manufacturer that they use to collect plastics in. But basically the transfer stations are, just collecting things in gaylords, and then the Northeast Kingdom has some trucks, and they go around to the different towns, and they pick up the recyclables and the other collected materials. They deal with household hazardous waste, the universal waste, and a lot of other things. So, and then they bring those things back to their central facility, and they have the baler, and they bale the materials, and they do the marketing. So that's what's going on in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Not all the waste management districts of Vermont do this, but the Northeast Kingdom, that's how things work there. Where over in New Hampshire, in the North Country Council towns, again, not everybody. Some people do collect their things in gaylords and have a regional sort of recycling organization deal with their recyclables and market them. But most of the towns are baling and marketing their own recyclables. And I think the way New Hampshire has it set up is just so ingenious. Basically, people, the citizens are outside. They walk up to the area. They put their recyclables in different places. This is the one for the heavy plastics. They put their things down, and then the worker there is sort of screening things, making sure there's not contamination, and they often use like tennis rackets to put the things through the door. And then this is the back side of that door here. I don't know if people can see my cursor going, and the recyclables, flow down into these bunkers underneath, and then that's how they deal with them. This is another transfer station. Again, you can see the citizen outside. They have the different trays here where different recyclables go through, get deposited. Then person that's working here at the transfer station, these are windows that slide up like a garage door or something, and then they rake in, I think you can see a shovel over here, using a snow shovel or whatever. They rake the things in, and again, they go into these tubes that fall, everything falls underneath. So here's where the stuff falls out, the paper, and here's the guy down here with the baler. So that's the way a lot of things work at a lot of the transfer stations in New Hampshire. So with that, I'll start on now with talking about improving safety at rural transfer stations. So we held workshops in each location, so it's more than just me talking. In the North Country Council, the workshops were also attended by the Department of Environmental Services and by Primex, which is the organization that insures virtually all the communities in New Hampshire. So it's New Hampshire's municipal insurer. And for the safety part of the workshop, the Primex representative actually did the workshop up there in the North Country Council. And you'll see later that I've taken a few of the slides that he used to supplement what we've got. In the Northeast Kingdom, we had the Department of Environmental Conservation was there, but also the person from Vermont's Office of Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and then Vermont's League of Cities and Towns, which is the municipal insurer over in Vermont. So we have some feedback from those two insurers that Rachel will mention at the end, but this whole presentation is informed by some of the things that they mentioned and talked about as well. So today's workshop, we've got a laundry list of things we're going to go through, so I'll just start. So equipment safety. Northeast Kingdom, most transfer stations, the only real equipment they have is a compactor. However, some transfer stations don't even have that. Some of them, there's a contractor there that just collects people's trash in bags and throws them in the back of a pickup truck, and they take off at the end of the day and go to the landfill. So, so not everybody has a compactor, but if they do have any equipment, it's really just a compactor. They all said that if they need to move bulky items or do any sort of cleanup at the transfer station, that they call up the Department of Public Works and get, you know, one of their bucket loaders or something, a bobcat, to come over, so that the transfer station staff is not really dealing with using equipment. However, in the North Country Council, like we mentioned, most of them are doing their own baling of recyclables, and then they also, you know, to move the stuff around, they've got a bobcat. So they've got compactors and these baler and bobcat. Some of them have more equipment and larger equipment, but some of them, again, have less. Not everybody is doing their own baling, and so some of those transfer stations would have less. But so for compactors, definitely need, you know, an adequate barrier to prevent people from falling in. You also need a fail-proof control when you're going to operate the compactor to make sure to prevent injury. You got to check off the drop-off area, make sure, you know, nobody's fallen in or anything before you power it on. When the power's on, you know, the button, you've got to be continuously pushing the button. If you let go of the button, the compactor stops, and enough separation from, you know, where you're standing there pushing the power to be on and where the compactor is, so that if something's going wrong with the compactor, you know, you're not tempted to try to reach your hand in, or a pole or something else that could potentially cause harm. And also, if feasible, you really only want to operate the compactor when the transfer station is closed, when there aren't citizens around, when there isn't that potential. But you also don't want to really be by yourself when you're operating any equipment, you know, in case something could possibly happen. You know, you want to have somebody there to be able to help you. So here's just some pictures that I took at different transfer stations, and to highlight some things about compactor safety. So here's one where, you know, here's the roll-off. The compactor mechanism is here. Here's the building. So you're inside the building. Here's the controls. Now, the way the door's set up and things, it's a little hard to be holding on to this button and being able to watch what's going on here. However, the operator of this transfer station was at the training and came to their defense, because I didn't notice when I was there, but you can almost see here, they have a mirror set up here so that actually you can see a lot better what's going on with the compactor when you're in here pushing the button, making it work. So so they have, you know, recognized some issues and worked on that, but just in general, it's not always the best potential. You know, there's issues here. This one, the person from Vermont Occupational VOSHA was pretty alarmed at for a variety of reasons. One, you can see right through, so there's openings on both sides of this bin here. So there's potential for, you know, someone to fall in, or something to, you know, somebody might put something in by mistake and then want to get it back out, whatever. You could potentially not see what they're doing because there's openings on both sides. This is just like a gasoline motor, so the whole push button cutoff thing is not totally easy here. I think there is a handle they have to be using, but also just the general safety hazard of using this using this piece of wood to hold up a heavy overhead door that could potentially come crashing down on somebody. So, so this was deemed to be not the best setup for a compactor, and multiple opportunities to make improvements here. And then this one seemed to me to be a really good setup. You know, you're in the room up here, you're above, there's a window on this side, you can't see, but you know, you can look down in the compactor. But then the gentleman from Primex, from the municipal insurer, they just really don't like stairs. And anybody that's going to use this compactor and put their trash in it has to go up these 2 stairs here. And there's really no railing for the stairs. And so, you know, you think you're doing a good thing in one area, and then there's potential safety issues in other areas. So, so the fact that these stairs are here leads this to be, you know, had some issues. Here's the compactors in New Hampshire tend to be larger and bigger, and this one, you know, there's really not much of a barrier. This is just, you know, knee high maybe here. I guess it would help if you were backing up a vehicle. You might, you know, get stopped, but it's not a lot to prevent a person from falling over or that. So, and you can tell this is a town that has pay-as-you-throw. They require people to use, you know, the town bags that they purchased. So this one is, you know, got some things to be desired here with this this compactor. But the person from the municipal insurer from Primex really liked this one. This is a good high barrier. It's the same sort of on the other side, the same sort of compactor, but you know, it's got a good high locked gate, and then if you did need to open it up to do any maintenance or repair, you know, you can. It's got a big wide opening. This transfer station is quite quite funny, and if you attend our Reducing Waste webinar next week, you'll get to see more pictures, but one of the operators there just likes to salvage all the stuffed animals that come in, and they are just posted all over this transfer station. It's quite amusing. So other equipment though, so we talked about how not everybody just has a compactor. Some people have Bobcats and some people have bigger vehicles. So when Primex was doing their presentation, he focused a lot on equipment safety, and the biggest hazard basically from vehicles, especially the bigger they are, is just slipping and tripping and hurting yourself getting on and off those vehicles. So that is an area, again, for the workers at the transfer station to, you know, be very careful and not to be thinking about consciously what they're doing, to not slip and trip getting on or off, and also when you're in the vehicle to wear the seat belt. Of course, sight lines, and be careful backing up. Again, it's best to operate any of this equipment when the transfer station is closed, so there aren't residents around, but that can't always be helped. So, you know, really being careful backing up, not disabling the backup alarm so that people know when things are backing up. You got to be careful about tipping over, which is part of the reason to wear the seat belt, because a lot of these transfer stations, you know, there's a lot of, especially in rural areas, there's not a lot of pavement, there's a lot of uneven terrain. If you're using a Bobcat to pick up, you know, a Gaylord full of electronics, it might be very heavy, and you could also tip over that way. You're trying to pick up too much for how big the vehicle, the capacity of the vehicle. And then another thing that people don't always think about is air quality. So a lot of rural transfer stations don't have a lot of big indoor space, but you might. You might be in the recycling center picking up Gaylords with the Bobcat, and there are potential air quality issues as well. So you want to be operating outdoors or where there's good ventilation. For balers, need to have fail-proof control, again, to prevent injury. You want to make sure that before the baler can operate, that it has to be all closed up, that you can't stick your hand in there. Usually that's like a magnetic connection that enables that feature, and you don't want to circumvent that. Some people feel like it's a pain in the neck, but you're really asking for potential injury if you circumvent the safety controls on the equipment. And again, you want to be sort of operating when someone else is around, if possible. And you also want to be careful loading the baler. We've got some pictures in a minute about steps and stairs. And you also want to be careful with, putting things in the baler by lifting things properly. You don't want to hurt your back or other parts of yourself. Oh, I guess I moved that slide up too early. Here's the Bobcat. Sorry about that. I got the slides out of order. Shoot. All right, here's a baler. So again, you want it to be all closed up before you can turn the baler on. So make sure that feature is working, that it needs to be closed, that it doesn't turn on if it's not closed. Here's a slide from Primex from that presentation. He just really did not like this use of this bench thing for loading this baler. It's too high. It's not just a one little step up. It's quite a step up. There's a lot of potential for slip, tripping, and falling here. There's nothing to hold on to. This was just really not something, a lot of transfer stations just sort of try to do what works and jerry-rig stuff, but this kind of thing, you really need something that you can hold on to, that has a couple steps up, that's not going to move, that you're not going to fall off of. So that's why that one's there. And this one, here's a baler, but this is all this cardboard. Cardboard and paper can be very slippery. So just this clutter here, there's a lot of potential for slipping and falling when you have paper and cardboard that you've allowed to sort of accumulate on the ground. So again, that's another issue with this equipment, is just trying to avoid clutter. We'll talk about that later, but and just being careful. Things can be slippery. And then here's the situation where the guy from Primex really didn't like this guy just like bent over this way, picking up the cardboard to put in the baler. That's a real potential injury point here. So just really, again, working on doing things that help you to not have to have poor posture for operating the baler. So there's lots of different things to think about with equipment. And then with all equipment, those compactors, if you've got to do maintenance, you've got to have the power off, and you really need a lockout tagout to prevent somebody, saying, why is the power to the compactor off? Here, let me flip the switch, So, so here's the slide from Primex about lockout and tagout. So lockout is when you actually can insert a lock in to prevent the equipment from being turned on so that it cannot be energized. You basically unplugged it. You want the equipment to be unplugged from its electrical source so that it cannot be energized. And tag out is, again, you're basically it's similar to lockout, but you're using a tag instead. So whenever you're doing your maintenance, it's really important to put something up right in the way of however you would energize it, and that's clear that, like, no, don't turn this on right now. So lockout tagout is important. Now we're going to switch over to personal protective equipment. And so that means proper clothing for the conditions. Basically means headwear, a hard hat, particularly if you're operating equipment, but also could mean a sun hat in hot weather. Footwear, you want things that are going to protect your toes and also keep you warm in the winter, and something to put on your boots for ice in the winter as well. In the Northeast, we have both, hot weather in the summer and very cold weather in the winter. And as you saw from the transfer stations and the photos, virtually all of them, everybody's working outdoors. There really isn't much indoor, and when there is indoor, for the most part, it's not heated. And safety glasses. Those are the kind of things that really should be worn all the time. You never know when a little chip is going to come off of something, and you could potentially damage your eyes. So some sort of glasses. Hearing protection, particularly if you're operating, loud equipment. A lot of the rural transfer stations, the folks in the Northeast Kingdom didn't feel like hearing protection was really something, based on the kind of things that they do, is not really necessary. And same with the hard hats. Gloves, you're going to hear again and again in this presentation about gloves. Nice thick leather will help protect you from cuts and scrapes. Also, just from the messiness of things at a transfer station and a recycling center. So gloves are key. And then another key piece is high visibility clothing. You want a reflective vest. It's at least a reflective vest, if it's not a whole reflective coat, but at least a vest that you can put over your coat. A vest is also something that would not be too hot in the summer. It's safer for you to be highly visible, but it's also helpful to the residents and the customers at your transfer stations. It gives you an air of authority, and it helps them, know who to be talking to. And when you're trying to tell them what to do, they might listen to you a little more if you've got something on. So personal protective equipment, it only works if you wear it. People can complain that, oops, sorry. Oh my goodness, I dropped sorry about that. Dropped the mouse and it skipped ahead. So anyway, it only works if you wear it. People complain that it fits poorly, it's too hot, it looks unattractive. Well, you got to get over that, because it really is important. It is protective. It is needed. It also should be personal. People shouldn't be really sharing their, the glasses or the hard hats or whatever. They should be fitted for you, and you should be, kind of keeping them and storing them properly. You want to store, you don't want to just hang your protective glasses near where you might be operating some piece of equipment, because dust and things will build up with them. You really should have a way to store things properly. And another thing that people found very enlightening in the workshops was that, your employer, the town, is really required, at least in Vermont and New Hampshire, and I'm sure it's probably everywhere, to be providing that personal protective equipment that is needed for you to do your job. So certainly the vests and the glasses, usually because the boots, you're probably also wearing them when you're not at work. Usually they're not providing 100% for people to buy their work boots, but a lot of times they offer a 50-50 or some portion cost share, because boots are needed to do your job, but you probably are not wearing them only at your job. As I mentioned before, none of these transfer stations have any sort of cooling, air conditioning. Most people are working outside or in a building even where it could be hotter. You also don't know what's going on with the people that are the residents that are using your transfer stations and what they might have been doing during the day. So heat exhaustion and heat stroke are something to be aware of. You want to be preventing it for yourself and your workers, but also you never know, what's been going on with the construction worker that comes in with his load of C&D, in his pickup truck. So, so heat exhaustion, basically you've got your normal body temperature and you're still sweating, but you need to be drinking. You need, if you haven't been drinking enough fluids, you can have fatigue, weakness, you might collapse. It can definitely occur inside as well. So that is a dangerous situation. Heat stroke is a serious medical emergency. Like, call the ambulance right away. People have high body temperatures and their skin is hot, red, and it's dry. So there's not sweating anymore. And basically they're fatigue, weakness, and collapse probably with that. So that is, call an ambulance and do your best while you're waiting for the ambulance to cool the person off with cooler water, that kind of thing. You don't want to put them into shock, but you get them in the shade, get water on their body to try to cool them off, so heat stroke. Preventing, you want to wear appropriate, lightweight protective clothing, but you still want to wear your gloves and your reflective vest. You want to have sunscreen on for hot weather, and you want to have access to shade. You want to be able to take breaks to cool off, but the biggest thing is to hydrate. You got to be hydrated. You got to drink fluids to prevent heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we've definitely got cold weather, and a lot of these folks, some of them have access to a heated indoor space. Usually, at least the little office space is heated, but a lot of the workers are, outside, dealing with the residents and dealing with the recyclables and things. So hypothermia, shivering, is the first sign of danger. And then you become sort of incoherent. So you get the umbles. People can stumble around. They're not that coordinated. They can mumble. Their speech gets slurred. They can grumble. People get kind of grumpy when they're hypothermia. So you want to look out for those kind of things. And the prevention is that you want appropriate warm and protective clothing. And you don't want it to get wet. So you need protection from wind, because that's definitely a way that people lose heat, but also precipitation. I mean, it can be 50 degrees, but if you get your feet wet, and your head wet, clothes are wet, you can get hypothermia even though it's not really that cold out. So a good idea is to have a separate set of warm socks and clothes at work, just in case something happens, you get wet. If you don't have a space at the transfer station where you can keep, your personal protective equipment and your spare set of clothes, then it's a good idea to keep that in your car, just in the trunk or the back or under the seat or whatever. So that's a good idea. You definitely want access to warm areas. Like I said, at least the office at these transfer stations tends to have a heater, so people can take breaks and go in there to warm up. And again, it's really important, even in cold weather, to be hydrated. That is a way to prevent hypothermia. Is you can't everything, your blood and everything doesn't circulate well if you don't have enough hydration. So drinking is important in the winter as well. for cold weather. All right, now I'm going to move on to traffic, because that is definitely a potential safety issue. There's definitely stories of people being injured and or fatally injured from someone backing up and pinning them against something. It can be a real problem. So one-way traffic is preferred if possible. You want to try to avoid the need for residents to be backing up. You want clear signs, lane markings, or use some orange cones. We heard again and again from the insurers, Primex and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, that signs are important, even though everybody that attended the workshops, everybody that works at transfer stations says people don't pay any attention to them. However, if something does happen, it is important. It can be an important mitigating factor for your liability if there are good signs and lane markings and that sort of thing. Even if you think people aren't paying attention to them, they can come into play after the fact. You want to have lighting so people can see what they're doing. Even in the winter afternoons, it's dark by 3:30, 4 o'clock up in the north part of Vermont and New Hampshire. So even if the transfer station isn't open in the evenings, even in the winter in the afternoon, so it can be, you need lighting. You got to have curbing and other barriers near your drop-off containers. We'll talk about that more later. Grade changes, fuel tanks, equipment. You need something to keep people from backing up or driving into your buildings and your equipment. And again, high visibility clothing for staff. It's safer for you because people can see you better, but it's also, like we said before, helpful to your customers. So here's some haphazard parking at a couple recycling drop-off centers. Here's people, these cars are facing this way, but here's another one over here on the edge that's coming the other way. This guy you can see through the window here, he's going the other way. So, and people are having to they're parking and then they're walking across, but other people are driving. So, some improvement could be made here to at least keep everybody driving the same direction. Here's another one where, again, people are driving in and some people are pulling in one way, some people are pulling in another way, they're pulling out, and so this again could benefit from maybe a one-way traffic flow. You drive in here, park, and you drive, when you leave, you drive out the other way. So those are a couple. And then here's one that, they've got a lot of space, but a lot of rural areas do have space. So folks, I'm standing up here where the recycling center is. People are coming in. Here's the compactor we talked about earlier that has the mirror, the trash. Then they drive up. Here's where they park to do with their recyclables. Here's the bulky bin over here. So they can either drive up this way or down here to put things in the bulky. And I think the metal bin's over here. You'll see a picture of that later. Because even though this one's got a good setup, they've got issues as well with some other things. So, so anyway, good one-way traffic flow would be the best. So this is where we're going to transition off to, Rachel's going to cover the rest of this presentation. We could take a few questions now if there are any. I don't know, Rachel, if you've had any come through that look like we should address them now.
Yeah, the only, a couple comments came through that were basically, noting that this applies to more than just rural areas. These are, even though our project was focused on these rural communities in New Hampshire and Vermont, that a lot of the rules Jennifer talked about and I will be discussing apply to, the larger communities as well. So somebody did, kind of make a comment about that. And then just another reminder, we are going to be sending out a link with the PowerPoint slides and the recording from this webinar. So I actually... Okay, so I think I went back by accident. Oops. Bear with me, guys. I think I accidentally went forward one too many slides. Do you see my screen, Jennifer?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
here we are. Sorry about that. So I'm going to start talking about slips, trips, and falls, and that is one of the most common injuries that the insurance providers noted as we went through this work. And it sounds basic, but it's really something that people aren't thinking about it. They're just going on with their day-to-day business and not realizing that slipping on the job, falling, anything like that can lead to a minor or major injury. So these are just some good things to keep in mind. You want to make sure the walkways, stairs, ladders are all clear of debris and spill and people leaving stuff everywhere. Physical and visual barriers near hazards are really important. So if there's a grade change, if there's a step, if there's dangerous machinery, if there's different traffic patterns, having those visual signs or traffic cones or something is really helpful. And Jennifer noted it's also important for insurance liability as well. So there's lots of oil leaks. There could be spills. People are throwing out liquids in their trash. Got to watch out for those. Curbing, wheel stops, they help keep vehicles away from edges. It doesn't do a whole lot, depending on how high the curbing is for a person falling off an edge, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. But, different kinds of physical barriers to prevent vehicles from, going off site. And then proper grading and drainage, and again, that helps with the spills, especially in the wintertime, ice accumulation, things like that. So we have a lot of pictures from things we found at transfer stations, and obviously this was at a transfer station in Maine, I think. And not only is it a slip, trip, or fall hazard, this is all glass. So broken glass can easily cut yourself. They're piled up kind of haphazardly. They're a lot higher than your head. So if you go to somebody goes to, reach a bottle or reach a box, they could definitely pull it on top of them and get injured that way. We saw a lot of clutter in offices, at transfer stations. So here is, just another example. The desk is cluttered. There's drums that are kind of blocking a secondary exit for this person. So yeah, they can go around, but again, clutter is just dangerous. If you had to run out an emergency, if you had to find something, it's very dangerous. Also, just things falling and spilling. This obviously is not great setup. And basically, what we saw was any corner or flat surface can become clutter. So anytime there's something flat, people are just instinctively, without even thinking of it, start piling stuff on it. So you can see here, there's clutter all over this, I don't know, it's compactor, but there's fluorescent bulbs right here, right here. I think that's a fluorescent tube. So this is dangerous because, fluorescent bulbs contain mercury, and so if they're broken, there can be a mercury emission. Also cut glass. Anything that you accumulate and pile up can be dangerous. Here's an example of ponded water. So again, if it was cold, this could become ice. Somebody comes out to throw their metal in the bin and slips and hurts themselves. So whether that's a customer or one of the operators at the transfer station, this is definitely an issue. So again, one way to deal with that would be to properly fill in any holes with sand and gravel and things so that they don't puddle. And just if they do, you can fill it in as it happens. So again, slips, trips, and falls are really common. We're going to focus on the metal bin and bulky waste collection bins because those are a big issue we found in transfer stations. So again, clear signage with these bins, good barriers to keep vehicles and people from falling, reduce clutter. Something I'll talk about is we found out from OSHA is that anything higher than 4 feet or more requires a railing. So, no drop off next to the bin. Otherwise, you're going to need a railing or a barrier to prevent people from falling off. And then a best management practice would be to actually cover the bulky bin or the C&D bin, construction and demolition debris. Because if materials get wet, like such as a couch or wallboard, mattress, it gets much heavier. So it's going to end up costing the transfer station and the municipality more to dispose of that. So if you can keep it covered and away from the weather and elements, it's a good idea for your facility. So this is an example of exactly what not to do. Here's a bulky bin. You can see that there's no kind of railing, no signage, no barrier. So a person, well, it might be easy for them to throw something in. They could also fall in themselves. And in this case, it's mattresses, but we don't really know what's all the way at the bottom, if there's other bulky items that are sharp or dangerous. So this definitely would benefit from a physical barrier, a railing, and some signage. This is just confusion. We took this picture. What's going on? There's stuff piled up out here. Here's the bin with, again, more things piled up. So there's not really any signage. Things are kind of haphazard, and people are just kind of dumping things where they see fit. So again, it's mostly clutter and it's some confusion. So better signage would help. The transfer station operator is going to have to deal with this. So basically, by just dumping things in different corners, it's creating more work. So some signage and some guidance so that people know where to put things would be really helpful here. Again, here's another instance where we found there was some confusion. This was actually a metal bin, and you can see some metal items there, but people also threw a bulky item in there, so an armchair, it looks like. And so basically, there's a couple issues. First of all is that the armchair shouldn't belong in the bulky bin, so the transfer station operator is going to have to go in and take that out, which creates more work and a potential hazard. And there's no, at least from this picture, there's not really any signage for people so that they know what to do with this item. I have some other views, but you can see here there's a lot of material that's kind of piled up on the side of the bin, and this is, definitely potential to fall on somebody. Somebody could trip over it. It's a hazard, and if you look at the next couple pictures, you can see a little bit better. The bin is full, and so people have just, piled stuff up, and you can see the big gap here. It looks like a table and some materials like on top of that table. This is just precarious, and it's definitely dangerous. One of the actual transfer station operator of this site was at one of our trainings and, was noting that, well, the bin is full. What should I do? Where should I have people put this? Because what are they going to do in the meantime? And so one of the things to brainstorm is make sure that before your transfer station opens, if it's going to be a busy time, like before the weekend, you want to make sure that the bin is empty or as compacted down as possible so that there's more room for items. And another idea would be to, instead of piling all of this stuff up on the side, to kind of put it on the ground level. So that way, you know, again, it's not, you know, potential to fall and injure somebody. So kind of directing people that if they can't fit something in the bin, to go down this hill, go down and pile it up on the ground. So this starts to look pretty good. You can see that it has a covering, you know, to protect it from the weather, so that's great. There's signage here, but if you look closely, somebody could just kind of, you know, fall off the edge here. There's no physical barrier, so somebody walking or driving, if they're backing up or making a turn, you could fall right off. This is a good example, again, of a metal and bulky collection center. Well, this is bulky bin. But you can see it has a roof to protect the items in the bin from the weather. It also has a good barrier here so people aren't, you know, falling off the side, and it has proper signage. And there's also a traffic cone kind of separating it. So this is an example of a good setup. Again, so this, you know, at first glance, this looked good. The metal bin is, you know, kind of tucked away. It has proper signage, but there's no railing here. So if somebody were to walk up or somebody were to drive up and then kind of turn it back, they could just fall right off this edge. And again, this is more than 4 feet. So technically, by OSHA standards, there needs to be a railing here. And we also noticed a gap. So again, this is, you know, a good foot or two gap. Again, somebody could fall, you know, reaching in or slip and fall into this gap. So you want to make sure that the bins, when they are brought to the facility, that they are pushed up as close as possible, or put in a barrier here too as well, so that somebody's not falling into the gap. So another barrier would be a good improvement for this area. And again, this happened when Jennifer was visiting a site in Vermont. No scavenging in the metal bin. It's quite dangerous. People do it often, we heard. This is a little kid, so it's just, you want to make sure that signs are posted about not doing this, and that you have people at the facility kind of watching and making sure this isn't happening. Because if this child fell or an adult fell into a metal bin, there would be a serious injury. And again, you know, there wasn't any signage here that we saw, but some proper signage would help in the event of an incident. It would definitely help with liability, and it would just make people more aware. Sometimes people, you know, aren't thinking and they don't think it's a big deal, but having a sign, you know, don't do this, this is dangerous, that, you know, people might think twice about doing this. This is an example of another good setup. So here is the bin. It's got a covering. It's got barriers. This way they can just drive up and pull it out. And up here, looks good. This is the front side. So this is the physical barrier, so people aren't falling into the bin right here. So again, it's you know, high enough that somebody's not falling, but they can still, you know, put the material over the side. And it's definitely a safe setup, and it's a great setup. This is another good setup that we saw. So a metal bin, this railing here, so people can, you know, it helps them. Nobody's going to fall in, but they can easily access it, and it's labeled and clear. Okay, and so now I will get into hazardous and universal waste. So hazardous waste, a lot of the facilities that we worked with aren't supposed to be handling hazardous waste. They're solid waste transfer stations. But what happens is that people will still bring hazardous waste to the facility. They might sneak it in. They might not even realize it's hazardous and just, put it with their regular trash. They might leave it outside the gates when the facility is closed. So ultimately, the transfer station operators have to deal with hazardous waste. So getting training to recognize what they are, help avoiding exposure, that's the first thing to do. A lot of these places do sometimes do like an annual household hazardous waste event, so there is some training for those. But if your site doesn't do one of those household hazardous waste collections, it's still a good idea to train employees on what these items are and how they should be handled. Having the proper personal protective equipment is very important. Jennifer went over this, but gloves are one of the the most important pieces of equipment. You can there's lots of different kinds. There's chemical resistant gloves. There's like heavy duty leather gloves, but they're very important for handling these materials. There's also aprons, safety glasses, goggles. A lot of facilities have these on site anyway for operating equipment. But keeping them on site and making sure you use it when dealing with hazardous and universal waste is important. So what happens if you are exposed? Again, Jennifer kind of talked about this. There should be water on site, also first aid, so first aid kit, and then some emergency procedures like, okay, well, what do I do if there is a spill? Who do I contact? That kind of information is really important. So that would be included as part of the training. And, the other important thing is to set up an exclusion zone for temporary storage. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of these facilities aren't set up to permanently handle hazardous waste. But if they get them, what are they going to do with them? So kind of having an area that's set aside to put these items, temporarily to store them before you do a collection event or before, the proper place can, pick them up or bring them somewhere. You need to make sure you have that set aside and it's labeled as a hazardous area and it's away from the public, but it's, something that the transfer station operators can access and deal with safely. And don't mix it with anything else. If it's hazardous waste area, it's just for hazardous waste. Universal waste collection, most of these facilities did collect universal waste, so examples of that would be the mercury fluorescent light bulbs, batteries, used oil, things like that. So again, proper ventilation wherever the universal waste is being stored, proper labeled containers, keep a spill kit on hand, and especially if you break a light bulb, don't vacuum that up. That's just you're sucking in the mercury powder and vapor. So make sure that you have a spill kit on hand to deal with anything like that. Propane tanks. So this is common, a lot of places accept propane tanks. They should be stored outside or in a well-ventilated area. They should always be stored upright, never on their side, never, piled up, and never remove the valves. Even if you think the propane tank is empty, we've heard, really tragic consequences from the insurers at our workshops, but, never remove the propane tank valves and make sure to store them neatly and upright. This is an example. It was a shed that had used oil collection, and so there's a couple things going on here. What's good is that it looks like these drums have secondary containment, but then you can see there's other piles of, potentially hazardous waste here. Looks like cleaning products or some other items. Here's an open bucket of oil, maybe. So it's just, another open container here. So it kind of turns a little, haphazard, and a cabinet that stores flammables right here. So again, this could use some help to get decluttered and a little more organized and a little more safe. Here's another very unsafe storage of fluorescent light bulbs. And as I mentioned, before, if a bulb breaks, it does release mercury into the air. So by just throwing the light bulbs and CFLs and everything in a box like this, that's a high potential for breakage. You also cut yourself on glass, things like that. There's no padding. There's no, cushioning, and they're not even stacked neatly. So this is a good example of what not to do for collecting bulbs. Also here, look at all these fluorescent lights just like leaning against the wall, very susceptible to falling and breaking. So again, this is not a good storage that needs to be remedied. Here is examples of a good storage area. So you can see that all of the bulbs are in these nice universal waste containers. They're stacked neatly and they're confined. All the other boxes are full. They're sealed and they're secure. They are stacked on shelves, but the shelving is secured and they're in boxes. And this is it's a good area. This is another nice, clean storage area for universal waste collection. So they have everything kind of labeled. They have fluorescent light bulbs or tubes and bulbs are in here. They have used motor oil, batteries. So everything has their own little area. So it's clean, it's neat. I'm not exactly sure what it looks like in here, if it's padded or anything, but it's a little better, it's nice and clean and less haphazard than the other box. So this would be, a good example of how to keep the storage area for universal waste. Okay, now I'll talk about fire and electrical hazards. So again, these not every place has heat, but a lot have some kind of electricity. So if there's open burning, obtain and adhere to permit guidelines. And Jennifer mentioned that open burning is not allowed for residents in New Hampshire, Vermont, and many other places, but facilities can get a permit, and there's certain guidelines that they have to follow if they are going to do any kind of open burning. But they should have proper fire extinguishers.
That's burning of yard waste, not not trash.
Thank you, Jennifer. Regardless, the facilities need to maintain proper fire extinguishers. So when in the office and anywhere else on site, make sure the fire department is familiar with your facility and has easy access. So there needs to be a phone. So again, I think most people kind of rely on cell phones nowadays, but the facility should have a landline phone in order, to be able to make emergency calls to the fire department, police, 911, and make sure that the phone numbers, the employees know what the phone numbers are, and that the fire department knows where you are and, your address and everything like that. Because a lot of places, at least in the Northeast, in these rural areas didn't have heat, a lot of people do use space heaters. So there is an issue, to use caution with space heaters. Make sure to, that employees are turning them off, unplugging them when they're not in use. Extension cords, temporary, adequate for load, and this could be a trip hazard, so another slip, fall trip hazard. Make sure they're, secure. Frayed or damaged cords should be addressed ASAP by a qualified person. So again, calling in somebody, whether it's from the DPW or an electrician or something, to make sure that the cords are replaced and not used if they're damaged. And also proper grounding for electrical items. Avoid storage near heat sources. I mean, this is an example. This probably shouldn't be stored directly next to this furnace. I'm not exactly sure what was in here, but it's just, again, there's some clutter. Depending on what it is, there should be space between the heat and the other collections of bins. Here's some pictures of fire extinguishers and, pretty uncovered offices. Fire extinguishers do have an expiration date too, so it's important for employees to kind of make sure that they're checking the fire extinguishers. You're supposed to test them regularly and change them out when they have reached their expiration. So biohazards, again, this is something that, most facilities don't accept, but people bring them in anyway. So if, transfer stations end up with these, biohazardous waste that people either sneak in or they bring in because they don't know what else to do with it. And so they have to deal with it in some way or another. Again, the common things are sharps, but you have to be really careful when handling needles because of bodily fluids. There's transmission of diseases. So again, this is where your personal protective equipment comes in, and sturdy leather gloves is a good option. At this time, again, if people are just bringing it to you because they don't know what else to do with their trash, it's a good time to offer them guidance. So it's a good teaching opportunity. The transfer station attendants, can try to, tell people what they should do with the needles. If it's important for them to have a collection container at the transfer station, some places actually do. So that's something you might want to think about. If not, a good advice to give to these residents would be to have them make their own container at home. So getting a heavy plastic container, like one of those Tide detergent bottles or something like that, they can fill that with their needles and label it sharp. Make sure it's closed, duct tape around the cap, and then they can put it in their trash. And then it can be disposed of as hazardous waste, but the sharps are secure. They're not in a bag. It's not risk of poking somebody or, injuring somebody that way. So again, that's something that transfer station operators could communicate to residents as a good way to kind of manage needles and other sharps. And again, just with the other, the hazardous waste, make sure there's water or first aid on site in case there was an accident, or somebody got poked or spilled something or dealt with something. Make sure that they can get treated if needed. So again, at least in Vermont and New Hampshire, I don't know if it's everywhere, but OSHA recommends if the facility, or requires that if the facility is open more than 4 hours at a time, there needs to be a bathroom. So this was, one of the rural transfer stations. This is fine at a porta potty. Employees do need to have a way to wash their hands, so there could be, water or hand sanitizer is fine. Also drinking water, so there needs to be a portable water supply if your facility is open more than 4 hours at a time. What we found at working with these rural transfer stations is that can sometimes be an issue because they're not heated. It wasn't feasible, or it doesn't work to leave bottled water on site because it could freeze. So again, that's one of the things that people kind of need to think about and deal with. And okay, well, employees then should bring water with them every time they come to work. or at least in the winter time, and then all other times there can be, a couple jugs of water on site. But that is something that a few people noted that they would have to pay attention to and try to find a solution for. And if there isn't a bathroom at your facility, if you need to go off site, you need to make sure that there's another person working with you that will stay on site while you go off. So another important item, and it's kind of related to slips, trips, and falls, but it's ergonomics. And so the definition of ergonomics is designing and arranging things that people use so that people and things interact most efficiently and safely. So it has to do with the way that you move your body and how you are, using your body to carry out tasks at work. So again, the insurance providers, when they did this training with us in the facilities, they talked a lot about body positions and lifting carefully. And again, this comes into play a lot with the electronic waste and bulky items because they're heavy. So, you want to make sure that you are bending at the knee and lifting what you can and, working with a partner to lift really heavy things, not try to do it on your own. Heavy items should be no higher than waist height, or they should be near waist height, to minimize the need to bend down. And again, avoiding repetitive motions and static posture. So kind of making sure that you're not sitting in your desk all day. You're walking around. You're not doing the same thing all the time. You're kind of using different muscles and really, working your body. So training is helpful for this, and this is, part of something that they do a lot for OSHA is the ergonomics and health and safety training. So exercise, fitness, again, that's something to encourage with employees. This is a hard job, and they need to, kind of be in shape for the job. So, a lot of times customers will come to the site, and they could be elderly, they could be young or disabled, and they need help. So, having their transfer station attendants really be able to work with them to help them with these materials is necessary. So just a few other miscellaneous items I want to mention. For some facilities, handling cash can be an issue. Sometimes they collect fees for bulky waste drop-off. Some facilities have pay-as-you-throw bags. They sell the bags. So you're collecting cash from people. And then vector control, some facilities collect food scraps, and that is true in Vermont, which I'll talk about in a second. So in terms of collecting cash, personal safety, video surveillance was, something that we saw to be a good idea at one facility because it allows the transfer station attendants to kind of be inside and watch what's going on their property, and then also it, kind of monitors cash transactions and things like that. So this is something that's relatively kind of easy and inexpensive to implement if you're dealing with a lot of cash and things like that. Food scraps are collected in Vermont. It's required in Vermont for all solid waste facilities. So this is fairly new, but it's working. And so some of the things that, they've talked about that are helpful is to use sawdust to control vectors. So here, they're saying cover your food compost with sawdust. Partner with a local woodworker to get the sawdust so they can donate it to you, and then partner with a local farmer to manage the containers. So I think in Vermont, a lot of facilities have found some pig farmers that will come and take the food waste. Here is another example of vector control. This is not compost, it's trash. But in this facility, while it's covered, it wasn't totally contained, and they had a problem with a bear. I don't remember if this was in New Hampshire or Vermont, but what they ended up doing is this wire is electrified. So that was the barrier to bears or any other animals that might, be attracted to the trash and try to come get it. So, okay, well, we have a few more minutes. So I'm going to go through just a few more summaries here. So again, just to recap, the top issues that the insurance companies talked about was slips, trips, and falls, especially in the rural areas that we were talking about. The uneven surfaces, they're often like dirt roads and grass with less pavement. So it's more uneven surfaces, there's more potential for icing, puddles, things like that. Ergonomics, again, making sure that staff can actually do the work and that they're prepared and they're trained on how to, safely lift and move items and things like that. Climbing off the roll-off, that's a big issue both for residents and attendants. Cuts from broken glass, closing doors and stacking items, clutter, these are all big issues. Traffic is another big issue, and Jennifer mentioned, a great not solution, but to be helpful with that would be having a one-way traffic flow, safety cones, and a reflective vest, because if you're wearing a reflective vest, people can more easily see you and avoid, a traffic collision. And this was just from our, the guy from Vermont with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the insurer there, mentioned that over the past 2.5 years, there's been $1.4 million in claims, insurance claims, for the whole state at these transfer stations. So it's, something to think about. They can really cause a lot of issues. And because of those claims, that raises the premiums for towns, so they have to spend more money on insurance and less money on things that the transfer station wants, whether that be equipment, PPE, other types of things. Signs we talked a lot about. Even if you think they're being ignored, put them up because they can be helpful in a lawsuit. So they are important, especially from the insurer's standpoint. Plan for emergencies, make sure the staff is trained on what to do, who to call, and just because you've always done something and haven't had an accident, that doesn't mean it's safe. So, people get in the habit of doing things a certain way, but it's important to constantly work with your employees and reevaluate, the facility practices and be updated on any, new training and new tools. So at our workshops, Jennifer talked a lot about these communities. So the North Country Council in New Hampshire, we had 21 transfer station workers come from 16 towns. In the Northeast Kingdom, we only had 10 transfer stations from 5 towns. And so you can see the difference there is New Hampshire requires these transfer station workers to be trained. And they have to keep up their training, so every year they have to have so many hours. So you can see that more people took advantage of this because they needed it. They needed to do certain hours, whereas the people that came from here in Vermont, is more they wanted it, for their own educational purposes. And it's really great that they came, but you can see if Vermont had a mandatory requirement, it might be more helpful. Our feedback from all of these participants, they learned a lot about the concerns with special wastes like propane tanks. It brought out information about traffics and vehicles, the need for barriers to prevent falls at bulky bins and metal bins. And, we showed you a lot of pictures of areas where these were lacking. So this information definitely brought that to the transfer station's attention. And then other things, ice and clutter and other fall hazards. And finally, the provision of PPE. So the fact that, the town is required to procure personal protective equipment for their employees. And so, again, the main things that, we told people to definitely ask about and make sure you have gloves and reflective vest. But there's other PPEs as well. And so this was our training about safety. We have a follow-up webinar coming up next week on the 28th that's focused on reducing waste disposal. And in this training, we're going to talk about how the transfer station operators can communicate this message to the public. So try to help, the residents and the customers that are coming to their facilities, give them important information about how they can reduce their waste, recycle correctly, properly, things like that. So that's what, if you're interested, you can sign up here. We also have some other projects we've done in the past. So we've focused, again, they're focused on rural areas because they are funded by the USDA grant. But we have presentations and publications and other materials on pay-as-you-throw, bulky waste, paint. So if you go to our website here, you can access all of these materials. There's handouts, BMPs, PowerPoint presentations. And finally, with a minute to spare, is our contact information. So there's Jennifer in my emails and our address if you want more information. So with that, that's the end of our webinar. We can go through some questions if any came up, Jennifer. No.
There really haven't been questions, but a few more comments about things to just maybe mention. And if people want to type in any questions now, we can try to get to them if you have any. But someone wanted me to just emphasize again, I think I mentioned that, equipment needs to have that backup warning alarm, and don't ever disable those things. Those are important no matter how irritating they might be when you're the one using the equipment and hearing it all the time, but it really is important. And that also the issue, and I think this came up with some of the municipal insurers as well, is residents, they're not wearing proper protective equipment sometimes. They come in to drop off, a load of metal junk out of the back of their pickup, and they're wearing sandals. So it might be beneficial to, and they're maybe not wearing gloves and they're handling this sharp metal stuff. So it might be beneficial too to have signage or guidelines about, residents when they're using the facility also need to, be properly clothed and shoed for that. So, and especially if you might have a lot of transfer stations consider small businesses, like a one-man contractor to also be, a resident and let them use the transfer station. So, having some guidelines about that. And let's see, definitely the scavenging is something that should be discouraged for legal reasons as well. But in order to maybe, people should consider maybe having an area that is for where people could put things that are in pretty good condition. So having an indoor swap shop or a covered area at least where people could put things that they thought were, in pretty good shape, so that the temptation to scavenge in the more hazardous pile of stuff is less. So what else is here? Yeah, and we'll talk more on the next webinar about providing information about opportunities for donation and reuse and that sort of thing. So yeah, the next webinar is going to focus on the 3 R's, reuse, reduce, recycle, or reduce, reuse, recycle. I got them in the wrong order, and that sort of stuff. And we've got some new materials we've developed that we'll talk about on the webinar as well. I think that's it. Let's see, reporting potentially dangerous accidents and conditions is an operator's responsibility. So those things need to be, do you have any suggestions for improving safety on stairs? How do you suggest long-time employees on board with great? Wow. Well, I think what's really helpful for, I know it's 3 o'clock, but for employees is to try to have training where you get people together, and if you can get people together even from a couple neighboring towns just to share information, that might be a way, even though somebody's really stuck in their way of doing things, they might be open to hearing, you know, if other people, I know at these workshops that we did when we put up some of these pictures of examples of things that maybe aren't the best, you know, people were commenting on those and talking about that. So, you know, I think that can be a way of maybe opening people's ideas. So I don't know, Rachel, if you're seeing any other ones.
Well, some of the easy ones, you know, the stairs, I think that a railing is helpful. The insurers, you know, mentioned a railing. And also paint. I think Primex showed, you know, like painting like a yellow strip on the stairs so that people, it's kind of like a visual reminder that they're there, was helpful. And then the other question I saw was how to get employees, you know, longtime employees to kind of change their habits is, you know, again, I think it's different for every facility, but, you know, just stressing the safety aspect of it and coming from, you know, a voice of concern for their well-being and that you know, value them as an employee and you just want them to, you know, be safe. It could be helpful and you know, so regular check-ins. So
there's another question that maybe we can see. I think Tara got off, our counterpart in New Hampshire who runs the training program. People were very interested in learning more about that program. So I will see if Tara can write something up. I think people were wondering about how long have they required the training, you know, what does it involve, and how, you know, how did they get it passed in the legislature, especially in that live free or die state. New Hampshire, you know, behind in some areas and leads in others. So I will see if I can get Tara to write something up about their program to share with people. Let's see. Railings do not assist the disabled or elderly. All right, well, I think we should probably end since we're over. Thank you, everybody. I hope people will join us next week for the webinar next week on reducing waste disposal. All right, thanks everybody.